Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. We're in the company of foreign editor Christopher Dickey. We're also with Pierre Aski of the news website Rue 89 or 89th Street. Your book, which comes out next week.
Next week, exactly.
The Right to Happiness.
It's a great program, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it's about the French crisis. It's about why France is in trouble.
Is it an existential crisis or is it a financial crisis?
No, it's a multiple crisis, actually. That's what makes it complicated.
All right.
Meltdown.
Also coming out recently with a book of his reporting in the Syrian city of Aleppo is Franco-Syrian photojournalist Amr Abed Rabo. Welcome back as well to Radio France International's Angela Diffley. If you're talking politics and corruption, we were talking about in part one when it came to France, Romania's ruling Social Democrats, well, they've somehow managed to turn the whole country against them just weeks after winning a landslide election. In the biggest protest the country's seen since the fall of communism, citizens outraged over a late-night decree in parliament, well, effectively legalizes bribes. That is, if they're under 200,000 lei, the equivalent of 44,000 euros, just so happens the threshold would get the PSD's leader off the hook in his own corruption case. That's a coincidence, insists the government. It says the bill is to relieve prison overcrowding. Let's see if protesters are buying that.
We are raising funds to build a prison so that all those who violate the law in Romania will have a place there. That's how money was raised at one time to build a school. Now, we want to raise funds so that the detainees have the place that they deserve.
Christopher Dickey, in this story, what's interesting to see is how this was the EU at the outset, putting pressure on Romania to up their ethical standards, to up the rule of law. And Romanians like it, they seem. It's the government that doesn't like it so much.
Sure, but I mean, I think that this is a problem that we've seen again, and it's what we were talking about in France, too. You get used to a system where basically bribery, a certain level of corruption, compensates for what is very often very low remuneration for government jobs. And so it's all the perks that come in. And here in France, I think government officials are not paid very much, but they have all these benefits, like you can put your wife on the payroll. And in Romania, it's even worse. You don't have the chance to really make a lot of money in government unless you're corrupt. So basically they're saying, we just want to tide things over. We want to make it all possible. But the people in Romania are not benefiting from this. And of course they protest.
Pierre Aski, is it 2 steps forward, 1 step backwards, or is it the other way around, what we're seeing?
Well, the problem is Romania is one of the sick countries of the EU, and it hasn't been in the past 25 years able to really build the rule of law and the secure foundation for its growth. Only a few weeks ago, there was a movie released in Paris called Baccalauréat by a Romanian filmmaker, Cristian Mungiu. And you could understand the petty corruption, how you cannot survive without dealing with officials who are getting their share on the way. And I was talking to the filmmaker, and he was saying, you know, this was before all this happened, how much this weighed on the national morale, and all of a sudden you see this outburst of people, the largest demonstration since Ceausescu fell. That's a big thing. I was there when Ceausescu fell in 1999, and the country was so much full of hope after one of the worst dictatorships Central Europe had.
And the second biggest demonstrations were a little over a year ago when there was this nightclub fire, 64 killed. It turned out that they'd been flouting the rules and regulations. And again, what seemed like a simple tragedy was in fact a political story of people flouting the rules and corruption.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that you have a very powerful public reaction to it every time there is something. And so that's a good sign of health in a country, that people don't accept official bypassing the rule of law. On the other side, there is a big temptation on the government side to play the populist card and say Brussels is trying to dictate what we should do, and we should have our own set of rules. And that's a very dangerous path.
All right, a week ago, we were commenting Theresa May's visit to the White House. Seems she left town just before the trouble started. Among the protesters who flocked to New York's JFK airport after Donald Trump slapped a temporary ban on citizens from 7 Muslim-majority nations were lawyers who used a terminal coffee shop as their makeshift headquarters, while other attorneys bought tickets so they could pass customs and come to the aid of travelers stuck in transit as a result of the surprise announcement. Now, one of the big debates of the past week, Christopher Dickey, has been, was this chaos improvised or planned? The fact that you had this sudden announcement and the confusion that followed.
Oh, I don't think it was planned by the Trump administration. I think that they wanted to make a bold stroke, and I think Trump himself wanted to honor his campaign promises. And as long as he was victimizing foreigners, well, that was okay. I don't think he thought through the consequences. I think they're starting to think through a lot of consequences now after these first couple of weeks on a lot of different issues. But I think in those first days, he was pushing ahead with his own kind of agenda. And anybody who said, you know, Mr. President, I think we ought to study this a little more, I just don't think he was paying attention.
Amar Abed-Rabo?
I'm very embarrassed with this story, honestly, because somewhere they say it's to fight terrorism and to fight extremism and Daesh, etc. But at the end of the day, we are taking their values. I mean, we are, for instance, in the ban, there is some text where you separate if someone coming from a minority in a Muslim country like Christian, he would be allowed. The ban doesn't apply to Christians, for instance, in Syria. And
Trump himself said that.
he said, yeah, he did.
Yeah.
So,
Of course, we'll see if the courts go along with that
yeah,
idea.
so, but in a way, I mean, in the speech, at least in the official speech, you are telling Daesh that we do like you do. We separate Muslims from non-Muslims or something like that. And this is very embarrassing because if you want to fight them, you don't take their values and replace them. For us, for a lot of people, the United States is Ellis Island, the Statue of Liberty, New York, the dream. I mean, everything is possible, you know, America, America. And you have this today. How long will it last? I'm very happy in a way with the mobilization, with the people in the airports and the streets. This is very healthy, as we were saying about Romania. It's not the same, of course, but how long will it last? What will the justice do about it? It's very interesting to follow.
And among the places where they protested was Great Britain, where they don't want Donald Trump to sleep at Buckingham Palace at a state visit.
Yeah, Theresa May was very embarrassed by this, and it looks, as Christopher says, as if it was rather chaotically imposed. She certainly had no idea, not that she would be anywhere in that loop early on, but she was taken aback, didn't know quite what to say when she was caught out in Turkey when it was first imposed. In Britain, there's been a lot of talk that it's handing a propaganda victory, as you say, to Daesh. You know, they're now able to say, look how Muslims are being discriminated against. Although it has to be said that many Arab states impose restrictions on fellow Muslim countries and make access quite difficult.
But they don't claim the values of the USA.
Absolutely.
The Western world.
And we can only hope that American business will make him see that dynamism means diversity, that they will help him to understand that in a globalized world, any company that hopes to be successful has to be able to hire immigrants.
I think there's something important to understand about the Trump administration. He was elected by people outside of cities.
Yeah, he's saying, I'm honoring a campaign promise here.
This is, look, the majority of Americans live in cities. What we know about cities is those are the places where people learn to live together. New York City, everybody lives together. It's one of the safest cities in the world. And 40% of its population was not born in the United States of America. Trump ran against that. He ran against that very idea of cosmopolitanism. So he doesn't really give a damn politically if he victimizes foreigners, because his basic constituency, says we don't need those foreigners here.
Unless it harms the economy, unless it leads to boycotts,
Even if
unless
it,
it
no,
leads
but,
to
but this
damage
is the thing.
to
This is
Silicon
the other
Valley.
thing you need to remember about Trump and Bannon, his people, is that they will just always blame somebody else. It'll always be somebody else's problem. It'll always be somebody else who did it. And that's why there's going to be so much hell to pay in the
All right, there was
United
also that fractious phone call where, according to the Washington Post, Donald Trump slammed the phone down on Australia's Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull after they argued over a deal under which Washington takes in 1,250 refugees parked at detention centers in Papua New Guinea and Nauru. Trump commented in a speech at a national prayer breakfast on Thursday that was short on prayer and long on promises.
The world is in trouble, but we're going to straighten it out, okay? That's what I do. I fix things. We're going to straighten it out. Believe me, when you hear about the tough phone calls I'm having, don't worry about it. Just don't worry about it. They're tough. We have to be tough. It's time we're going to be a little tough, folks. We're taken advantage of by every nation in the world virtually. It's not going to happen anymore. It's not going to happen anymore.
2 weeks into his presidency, Pierre Asqui, are you getting used to the rhetoric? Are you? Or...
No. When I see that, what you just showed, I cannot imagine that this is the president of the United States, the leader of the free world, as we used to know. He was right on one point. The world is in trouble, but I think it's in deeper trouble since he's become president, and that's really part of the equation. And I wrote a column that was published by the Daily Beast, actually.
Here's another beastie.
Yeah, and in which I said that this is a gift to Europe, because Europe is disunited, hasn't been able to get back on its feet for the past 3 years, from one crisis to the other, and suddenly it finds itself with an enemy. Only a few days ago, Donald Tusk, the president of the EU, put the US together with ISIS and Russia as the threats to Europe. And indeed, when you hear the man who's been nominated as or proposed,
so will Donald Trump then impact the Dutch, the French, the German elections?
That's part of the equation, but he has clearly expressed himself against the European Union, and he's possible ambassador to Brussels, who is now at the center of a big controversy, was on the BBC saying that the European Union was like the Soviet Union, and that's something that should be destroyed. So suddenly the Europeans are facing not just a man who's funny and whose election promises are not going to be kept, but someone who's putting his word into action. And particularly on important issues like climate change, like multilateral trade or multilateral institutions, Donald Trump is really doing what he said, and that's really the most threatening thing.
I think it's important to differentiate between the conservative agenda of this government, which is a conservative agenda, and the complete lunacy of the president himself. I mean, there's a real dichotomy here, and you could see it today, or actually yesterday, in the statements coming out about policy on Israel, policy on Ukraine, all these things. All of a sudden, after all the things that Trump had said, we see Nikki Haley, the ambassador to the UN, and other statements, and Spicer and the White House spokesman, rolling them all back. No, we're not going to recognize Crimea. Yes, we're going to keep sanctions in place on Russia. No, we don't think it's a good idea that they build settlements or new settlements and expand settlements in the occupied West Bank. Where did all that come from? That's because there's this whole part of the government that has a more or less legitimate conservative agenda. You may not agree with it, but it's reasonable. And then you have Trump. And that gives us a very weird environment.
And Bannon.
And in the era of infotainment, the Donald seems to bleed into every conversation. American football players have had to deflect questions at pre-Super Bowl press conferences. By the way, viewers during Sunday's game will be treated to, yes, an ad touting the virtues of avocados made in Mexico.
For suburban bombs.
It's crazy the way, Angela Diffley, that we cover the story and also the way in which the messages are getting across.
Well, none of us know how to deal with it. It's the first time, and as you say, do we separate? Certainly this week, that has been something new, separating the regular Republicans from Donald Trump. Another one to add to your list was yesterday in South Korea, General Mattis. He said, no need to worry. We are not suggesting that Japan and China set off nuclear bombs, or Japan and South Korea set off nuclear bombs. It was back to a more understandable agenda. But it's so difficult to deal with him. I do agree with you. I think it is in some ways a useful thing for the European Union that now there is a clear focus and it's up to us to stand up for the values.
On the other hand,
West.
he's the guy on the side that has a winning streak, right?
He has, but I think that has unsettled a lot of people in Europe. I think that many people who might, for example, have voted for Marine Le Pen and liked her, let's pull out of Europe, or let's have a vote about pulling out of Europe and let's definitely pull out of the euro. I think that a lot of people are unsettled by that, having seen Brexit, having seen Trump. The world is very uncertain now, and I think she softened her stance on all of that because it's not playing quite so well. Britain is in a really difficult position, of course, now because it has become more dependent on the United States at exactly the time when the United States is highly
Less
unpredictable.
reliable, yes.
Amar Abed-Rabah, you agree?
I hope it's good news for Europe and for France, but honestly, I see also people who are saying the contrary, who say something like, if this guy can be elected, then Marine Le Pen can be elected. She's in a way she's much more politic and much more
She's
sensible.
much smarter. She's a much smarter politician than Donald Trump. But I heard a lot of that in November and December. I hear less and less of that as we see more and more of Trump as president. Because there was always the assumption that he would become a reasonable person. We haven't seen that.
Before we go, let's take advantage of the fact that we have a former Beijing correspondent among us, Pierre Aski. We need your take on something. The disappearance of a Chinese billionaire, Xiao Zhanwei, whose Tomorrow holding conglomerate dabbles in everything from real estate to beet farming. He's been missing since last week, and this Wednesday, his company putting out a full-page ad in a Hong Kong newspaper where he pledges his full allegiance to the Communist Party. Where is he? What's going on?
He's definitely in China's mainland. Apparently, he's been taken by security agents in Hong Kong, where he was living. He was living in a luxury hotel in Hong Kong for the past 2 years. It's a very interesting case because this is a man who was the leader of a student union during the Tiananmen Square event in 1989. And he played a big part in helping the authorities to put down the student movement. And he became, thanks to that, a very wealthy, very influential character, very close to the Communist Party and its leaders, and his conglomerate was instrumental in dealing with the family business of the communist leaders. And suddenly we don't know why he fell out of love with the Beijing leaders, and he went to hide in Hong Kong, or not hide, but at least be in a more secure place in Hong Kong. Hong Kong, as you know, has a separate legislation. It's an autonomous region within China for the next 25 years. But this has not prevented the security forces from taking him, grabbing him, bringing him back, and we'll know what comes next for him. But I think it means trouble. We are in a year of the party congress, and Xi Jinping is not a man who has, at the moment, especially with Donald Trump somewhere in the background, is going to be soft on anything in domestic politics or domestic dealings. So
it's part of Xi Jinping tightening his grip on power still.
Yes, because the anti-corruption campaign that Xi Jinping has presided over since he was in power has cleaned some of big fish, particularly in the army and so on. But it's also helped to fight opposite clans within the Communist Party. And so we don't know exactly what deals he's been involved in. But the most worrying thing is not so much what happens to him, because I think he knew exactly what kind of risk he was taking. What it means is also that the autonomy of Hong Kong is less and less respected by Beijing, and that's a very bad signal for the Hong Kong residents.
All right, bad signal you're saying for Hong Kong. And of course, there's another aspect to this story. Today was the first trading day of the Chinese since the Chinese New Year, and stocks in his company plummeted. What does it mean for doing business with China, Christopher Dickey, when you think about it?
Well, Pierre would be better on that too than I would be, but I think the question with doing business with China is how much can you rely on the rule of law in China? This is always a huge question in doing business anywhere in the world. And when you have the levels of corruption that you've seen in China and the possibility that if the people you're in bed with suddenly rub the power elite the wrong way, they'll wind up in jail. It's a risky environment, but it's also, I have to say, an environment in which you can make huge returns, and a lot of businessmen think that's worthwhile.
Ready to take the risk. Christopher Dickey, I want to thank you. Thank you as well. Amr Abed-Rabo, Pierre Haski, Angela Diffley. Stay with us, though. It's time for Media Watch.
Oh, boy.
We say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
In the past fortnight, we've discovered just how much the lines have been blurred between politics and entertainment and infotainment. What we showed that Super Bowl ad, of course, is another example that's glaring.
Yes, absolutely. The US Commander-in-Chief chose to pick another fight last night with Arnold Schwarzenegger. And bizarrely, it's at the National Prayer Breakfast. I say last night because it was last night for us here in Paris. Now, why did he do this? Well, because he can, but also because he's largely obsessed with his own success. The Governator struck back very quickly, and we do actually have a clip to play for you of the two men, what they had to say.
Oh, boy.
We had tremendous success on The Apprentice, and when I ran for president, I had to leave the show. That's when I knew for sure I was doing it. And they hired a big movie star, Arnold Schwarzenegger, to take my place. And we know how that turned out. The ratings went right down the tubes. It's been a total disaster. And I want to just pray for Arnold, if we can, for those ratings, okay?
Hey, Donald, I have a great idea. Why don't we switch jobs? You take over TV, because you're such an expert in ratings, and I take over your job. And then people can finally sleep comfortably again.
So there you go. Arnold wants us all to sleep comfortably once again and thinks he should take over. Arnold Schwarzenegger also released this statement. Arnold is praying that President Trump can start improving his own approval ratings, which were the worst in history for an incoming president, by taking his job seriously and working inclusively. Lots of people thought it was very strange that he chose this particular venue to say what he did. Lots of support coming in for Arnold Schwarzenegger. I mean, Arnold's ratings might be a touch low, but they aren't lose the popular vote by 3 million low, says Tony Poznanski. It's a good point. And basically, the ratings are, I think it's something like 23% lower than Donald Trump used to get. That's something that really needs no explanation there, somebody's view on Arnold striking back. And this one says, so did he really think he could arm wrestle with Schwarzenegger? Arnold won, Donald 0, they say. This reaction, of course, from Donald Trump. He couldn't just leave it at that. He had to tweet again today. Arnold Schwarzenegger did a really bad job as governor of California, and even worse on The Apprentice, but at least he tried hard. Now, interestingly, if you do care about the issue of ratings at all, which many people don't, Salon has reported on this one, saying it isn't actually all down to Arnold Schwarzenegger. They point out that this is now the 14th series. Perhaps people are a little bored with it all. They say that this was an attempt to revive an unscripted series that hadn't aired in 2 years and that nobody really missed. And they also point out that it was up against things like The Bachelor, which are already hugely popular. So he was on a bit of a losing streak anyway. The Republican Party would rather people remembered the National Prayer Breakfast for a bit of religion, and they put out this tweet trying to remind people that Donald did actually talk a little bit about religion. But one thing that is important to remember is that while he is drumming up these little spats and rows that everyone loves to talk about because they are funny, a lot of other stories are getting overshadowed, and some really huge stories coming out far and wide, and many, many different issues. Raw Story reporting on the fact that there was no readout of the conversation between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. There are allegations that that is because the recording equipment in the Oval Office was switched off. It's the kind of thing that if others did it, there would be a lot of criticism about it. But we don't yet know whether that's true. They don't yet have proof, but they do say it is curious. The Nation reports on a leaked draft executive order, which goes under the name of... It's all rather strange, really, but it's basically supposed to be about religious freedom. But what it's actually doing is legalising discrimination.
I want to ask our panel here, and which is, we're seeing conspiracy theories emanating not from the right, but from the left, saying, for instance, that the confusion we saw last weekend at airports was because they didn't want us to focus on the fact that Steve Bannon, his strategist, is now inside of the National Security Council. What do you make of that, Piaz?
I think we're looking for conspiracy theories because none of it makes sense. So the only sense you can make is a hidden plot that is organizing all this. But I think the reality is probably that there's no sense.
Well, I know, but I think there's a communication strategy here, but it's not as simple as that. The simple idea is you throw so much at people that they can't fix on any one idea. It's not just Steve Bannon or not just the airports. You just keep things, an avalanche of news, an avalanche of events, and people forget within a day or two or even hours what the story was yesterday. And you see that again and again and again. Who's talking about Mexico, the wall, immigrants in that context anymore?
Mexicans.
Yeah, Mexicans. Nobody in the United States at the moment, because that's all yesterday's news. My hope is that we will start to think of Donald Trump as yesterday's news, but we haven't seen that happen yet.
All right, a bit of an ambivalent view, but we'll have to leave it there. Many thanks, Christopher Dickey. I want to thank as well Emma James. I want to thank the rest of our panel. Thank you for being with us here in The World This Week.